this week we're just going to go over a few sections. And then I know there was a little bit about giants in that section that we would have read the last week. But then there's a lot more about that that's coming up, like the week that we're doing now. It's like giants in every paragraph. And so we'll kind of go over that and look into that whole deal about giants and why it talks about giants so much. So for this week, we're actually going to start in Numbers. And so this will be sections where you'll have like sections of passages where you can look at those and read along in your Bibles. You know, it always helps that, you know, we have different translations and such. That's a good thing. So Numbers 26 through 13. And we're going to talk about the second episode of Moses getting water from a rock. Not Iraq, a rock, right? Even though they were close. Yeah, they were very close to Iraq, right? All right, Numbers 20, starting at verse 6. Then Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces. And the glory of the Lord appeared to them. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Take the staff and assemble the congregation." Now, what's happening is the people are whining about food and water, right? And so, and they want to go back to Egypt. And they, you know, why, if we're going to die here, we might as well have died in Egypt. At least we had food there and, you know, all that good stuff, right? And so notice the way Moses reacts and notice the way God reacts. Has God ever gotten mad at the people? Yes, absolutely, right? And like enough to where he was going to kill them all, right? And so, and then Moses, you know, it's like they kind of go back and forth. You know, it's probably like parents, you know, honestly. It's like the husband and wife, you know, sometimes the husband wants to kill the kid and sometimes the wife wants to kill the kid. And God forbid they both want to kill the kid at the same time. I'm thinking, you're messed up then, right? So, yeah. So it said, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Take the staff and assemble the congregation, you and Aaron your brother, and tell the rock before their eyes to yield its water. So you shall bring water out of the rock for them and give drink to the congregation and their cattle." Right? So does God seem mad at this point? No, right? "And Moses took the staff from before the Lord as he commanded him. Then Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, 'Hear now, you rebels.'" Is Moses mad? Yes, he is. "Shall we bring water for you out of this rock?" And Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock. And he didn't just strike the rock with his staff. He struck the rock with his staff twice. And water came out abundantly. And the congregation drank and their livestock, right? So it's like, hey, worked out though, right? Not really. The people got to drink, right? "And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not believe in me to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them. These are the waters of Meribah, where the people of Israel quarreled with the Lord, and through them he showed himself holy," right? So now what's going to happen? Or what's not going to happen? Yeah, Moses and Aaron are not going to be able to go into the promised land, right? So that seems like that's a fairly harsh punishment, right? So note that chapter 20 in general is a pretty harsh chapter. We have the death of Miriam right at the beginning at 21, and then you have this episode with the water and the rock. You have the Edomites later refuse to allow the Israelites to pass through the land, and then you have the death of Aaron himself for the failure in this episode at chapter 20 verse 4. 20:24. And so, you know, things go badly pretty quickly. Note that in chapter 17, Moses was instructed to strike the rock in order to get water, right? So before, that was the instruction, you strike the rock. But God specifically said this time around, speak to the rock, right? So note that the striking of the rock would have elicited a show of faith and appreciation from the people, right? So at that time in chapter 17, because look, things are moving fast, right? And they're like, oh, we're all going to die. And then God does something. And then they're all like, oh, we're happy. And then Like within verses later, they're all, everything's terrible. And so things move fairly quickly. But that, at that time, would have elicited a show of faith from the people, and they would have been, happy. So now, instructing Moses to speak to the rock as opposed to hitting it would have been even a greater miracle, right? And so there would have been no chance that it would have been misunderstood. So, for instance, striking the rock, if we can envision that there's water back there, which there certainly could be, if you just hit the rock, it's possible that you might knock something loose and then the water comes out, right? And so, if God says, hey, do that, and then you go over and you strike the rock and then boom, it comes out, the people will be like, that's pretty spectacular, but, he probably just knocked the rock out of the way, right? And so now it's speak to the rock, right? And so there's no chance at that point, right? If you speak to the rock and then suddenly water comes out, then, that's pretty definitive. So the results should be the escalation in miraculous activity. This escalation in miraculous activity should produce another show of faith on the part of the Israelites. And again, speaking to it takes away the possibility that the water was let loose by striking it. And there was something I was going to say. I was going to say, so when Jesus brings Lazarus back from the dead, right? How many days does he wait? Or how many days is it after he's dead?
4.
It's 4 days. Why is it 4 days?
3 days you're considered.
Yeah. After 3 days, you're good and dead in the ancient world, right? So after 3 days, you were dead. And so it seems likely that people had been resuscitated, if you will, or just come back when they were thought to be dead, right? And we think, those ancient people, right? But I literally, just the other day, I was reading in the news where this lady, they took her from the funeral, the assisted living to the morgue, and she resuscitated right there on the thing, right? So she was not dead, and so they thought she was dead. And so, even for us today, so you wanted to make sure somebody was good and dead, and after 3 days, if they hadn't moved around and stuff, then they're dead. So when Jesus goes in and he brings Lazarus back to life, there's no doubt, right? And of course he just speaks to him, right? He doesn't do the like chest compressions or whatever. He just not that they did that back then, just for the record. I'm not saying that they did chest compressions in the ancient world. I'm just saying that when he speaks to him and says, come out, there's no question as to what's going on there. It's kind of same thing here. So we're escalating the miracle. Now we're just going to speak to it. And then when the water comes out, there you have it. Note that Moses, the instrument of Yahweh, right? So he is the, God's instrument. He takes credit for the miracle. He says, should we get water from this rock for you, right? So then he steals God's thunder, right? And he puts it on himself. He also strikes the rock instead of speaking to it, right? Which lessens the effects of the miracle. He also becomes angry with the people, whereas in this instance, apparently, hey guys, y'all come on in. Whereas at least in this instance, God is not mad, right? For whatever reason. Hey, y'all come on in. So he becomes angry. At this point, Yahweh is not even angry, right? He just gives them the means by which to do it. But again, it's a more spectacular miracle. It should elicit more faith from the people because again, the people are weary and listen, they're out here in the wilderness and they're wandering around. Let me just say, I'd get tired of eating that stuff too. You would want something. So God seems to be, at least at this point, he seems to be a little like, well, give him a break, and he doesn't. Notice this disobedience by the highest in leadership is something that Yahweh is not going to accept, right? He can't have Moses and Aaron, Moses, the spokesman of God, basically, and then Aaron, I mean, technically he's the spokesman, but the high priest at this point, we can't have them breaking the rules. I will say, and it's a little blunted for me to say it by this week's readings, where, and I don't remember the verse, but, it basically Moses pleads and says, let me go into the land, and God gets mad with him, and he says, he gets angry, and he says, no, you're not going, and so, but I do kind of always think of it as Aaron and Moses, it's almost like they get to retire, right? And so, I mean, they have stressful jobs, right, leading these people, and, when they retire, it's not like they get to go, home. For us, you can retire and you can go home and you can, binge watch shows on Netflix or whatever. They would have just been with the same people, right? So it's like, it's there. It'd be like if I retired and just stayed at the school, which probably what I would do. But, you just stay at the school and it's like, here I am, still here, And so it's not like they really get a break in retirement, right? And so by them passing, it is like that they get their retirement, right? Notice too, just for the record, that eventually, when Moses dies, and I think Aaron, I don't remember how Aaron dies exactly, but note that Moses gets to go up, on the mountain with God, and Aaron does too, I'm pretty sure. Right? And so they both get to go hang out with God while they die, right? And so I'm thinking, I know we always say, I want to go in my sleep, what's the whole saying? I want to go in my sleep like my grandfather, not like the screaming passengers in his car. So we always say, we want to go, we want to go in our sleep, but I'm thinking certainly it would be on up there to, hang out with God while you die, right there. It's like also, just for the record, Elijah, he's in a similar situation, right? Where Jezebel's after him and he's crying out to God. And he's like, I can't take this anymore. I just can't do this. And so what does God do? He says, okay, we'll go to this place. And he goes, and then God sends his throne chariot, right? So again, I mean, he doesn't even die. He just gets taken up by God's throne chariot. And so I'm thinking that would be pretty cool for God to send his limo, his personal limo, which is a flaming throne chariot. I mean, literally, he got to sit in the throne of God.
I'll send the limo.
Say again?
I'll send the limo.
Yes, yeah, he did. It's funny. He even leaves his coat, right, with Elisha. He's like, here, hold my coat. All right. Next, we're going to look at the bronze serpent and flaming serpents coming after us at Numbers 21, 4 through 9. You're talking about using a switch to get punished with, and I got switched too, and I got throttled with the belt several times when I was a kid, and but I'm thinking this is a lot worse, and I complained, but they had a lot of reason to complain about this deal. So at Numbers 21, 4 through 9, from Mount Hor they set out by the way to the Red Sea to go around the land of Edom, and the people became impatient on the way. Shocking, right? And the people spoke against God and against Moses. And you would think that eventually they would learn their lesson. Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? Right? And we just literally got away from a minute ago where they were complaining. For there is no food and no water. And we loathe this worthless food. Right? I mean, I might get tired of it, but I don't think I'm gonna call the food that God is cooking for me worthless. Right? Then the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people so that many people of Israel died, right? And the people came to Moses and said, we have sinned. Yes, you have. For we have spoken against the Lord and against you. Pray to the Lord that he take away the serpents from us. So Moses prayed for the people. And the Lord said to Moses, make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole, and everyone who is bitten when he sees it shall live. So Moses made a bronze serpent and set it on a pole. And if a serpent bit anyone, he would look at the bronze serpent and live, right? So that's weird, okay? I mean, did any of you think that's weird when you read that? It's like, this is a little strange. All right, notice they've just come off a big victory with the defeat of a Canaanite king. They've just got water from the rock there not long ago. but they're still longing for Egypt, right? Which is a slap in the face to God, right? Because he's the one who brought them out of Egypt, and he's providing for them, and yet they're still complaining. So Yahweh sends fiery serpents. So note that the fiery aspect is likely not literal fire. They're not like on fire, because that would be scary, especially at night. You'd see them coming. Right? These days they would have like LED lights on them or something. It's going to be from their bite, right? So the bite is going to be, it would sting, right? To be bitten by a snake. I've never been bitten by a snake, but I'm going to guess that it would be fiery. So just for the fun of it, what snakes do they have in this area? Well, they have the deadly carpet viper, right? Which is I think the more deadly snake. And then you have the puff adder and the sand viper. So those would be your three options. But the puff adder and the sand viper, I don't think you would die. So it would just be painful. So it seems more likely that it would be the carpet viper. Interestingly, too, the word behind serpents here is seraphim, right? And note, when we talk about divine beings, and I always use the terminology divine beings because there's many different types of divine beings, right? We always just say angels, right? So they're just angels. Well, we think seraphim are angels, right? And we think that cherubim are angels, right? And I've told you, cherubim are not, they're not like what we think of as angels, and they're certainly not little babies like the Renaissance paintings. They are large, griffin, four-legged animal creatures with, human faces and big wings and stuff, right? That's what a cherubim is. And so that's what's on the Ark of the Covenant, the throne of God. It has those cherubim with their wings coming across and everything. And so seraphim are serpents, right? They're some sort of serpent creature. And so when it would appear, if, since those are the same word, it would appear, for whatever reason, that when we're talking about seraphim as divine beings in the Old Testament, it would seem that they are serpent-looking type creatures, right? Because again, the words are the same, and so seraphim means serpent, and so who knows? Note that this is a form of what is called sympathetic magic. Okay, and again, sympathetic magic was pretty standard in the ancient world. So the creation of a like image, which is then imbued with the power of a magician, normally the way they do it, or in this case, by God himself, would allow for the warding off of the thing symbolized or imaged by that image, right? And so again, I know sometimes y'all look at me and think, this sounds stupid and crazy. But if you look at 1 Samuel 6, 3-5, it's exactly that, right? So in that passage, you've had the Philistines. They took the Ark of the Covenant, right? And they took it back to the temple of Dagon, right? And Dagon, just for the record, when you read in the Apocrypha, you read Bel and the dragon. Bel, not Baal, B-A-A-L, but B-E-L. Bel is the same as Dagon. And so they take the Ark of the Covenant to Dagon, and they put it in the temple of their God, because again, their God would be most powerful in its own temple, in its own nation, right? And so there's no chance that, we basically have taken Yahweh captive, right? Because the Ark of the Covenant symbolizes Yahweh or his presence. And so what happens? So they wake up the next morning, they go in, and Dagon's statue is knocked over, right? And so that's a hint. That's like, hey, Yahweh pushed over your God in his own temple, right? And so they're like, oh, he must have fallen over, whatever. And so they put it back up, and then they come back the next day, and the head's chopped off and the hands are chopped off, right? And so then it's like, oh, hey, you know what? And so they take it out, and they're like, no, there's also plagues that have come with it. And so turns out the Ark of the Covenant is not something that you just want to take away from Israel. So at 1 Samuel 6, 3-5, it says, they said, if you send away the ark of the God of Israel, do not send it empty, but by all means return him a guilt offering, right? So not only do you need to return the ark, but you need to put a guilt offering in it because you messed up. And so send a guilt offering. And it says, then you will be healed, and it will be known to you why his hand does not turn away from you. And they said, what is the guilt offering that we shall return to him? They answered, 5 golden tumors and 5 golden mice, according to the number of the lords of the Philistines, for the same plague was on all of you and on your lords. So you must make images of your tumors and images of your mice that ravage the land, and give glory to the God of Israel. Perhaps he will lighten his hand from off you and your gods and your land. So they're going to do the same thing. Now, they have tumors from whatever pestilence he has sent, but how you make a golden tumor, I guess it's like a golden bump or whatever. And so they put them in there, and that's to ward those things off, right? And so it's the same thing. It's sympathetic magic. You make, and clearly they knew that at this point that they knew that mice spread diseases, right? And so they, you were going to make the mice too, all right? So it's the same type of thing. It's just, again, it's understood that this is the way things work in the ancient world. And so again, this shows an example where Yahweh works with the people in ways that they would expect. So again, keep in mind, we've not been out of Egypt for that long. And so he still works with his people in ways that they understand. If he completely attempted to just retool all the thinking of Israel, the Israelites, they would have just been confused and they wouldn't have accepted it at all, right? Because this is too foreign. Again, I've used the example. It would be like if somebody came to you and told you that everything you believe about Christianity is wrong, and whatever, you should be worshiping Buddha or something, right? You would be like, no, that sounds crazy. Well, it's the same thing with them. They've been worshiping pagan gods and all this stuff for a long time, and it's weird for them. It's okay for them to worship Yahweh because in their minds there's other gods, but Yahweh is their God, right? And so that's kind of where you end up with, is that you end up with, don't worship other gods other than Yahweh. And so if we can get them there, then God is pretty happy. All right, so this whole deal also, it shows an act of faith once you're bitten. Because what does this whole deal not prevent? So you look at the serpent when you're bitten, but what does it not prevent? It doesn't prevent getting bitten. So you're still going to get bitten, right? But then you look at the bronze serpent, right? It's like, I've been bitten. And you're like staring at it. And you're like, how long does this take, right? I'm sure they complained, God, this is so stupid. Why am I looking at this thing? My leg hurts. But it is an act of faith, right? You have to look at the bronze serpent in order to be healed. And so look, if you don't believe that it works, then you're not going to go look at it. So at least there's that. And again, they're so faithless that if we can just get this, if they'll just believe that they can look at this serpent, which again is completely within their mindset. Same thing. Remember when we talked about Isaac and the sacrifice of Isaac, or the potential sacrifice of Isaac? And I said, for us, if I were to tell one of you to go sacrifice your child, you'd look at me strange. In the ancient world, if a god told you to sacrifice a child, then you would at least not think it was that far-fetched, because again, people sacrifice children to Molech and Chemosh. And so Abraham would have at least not been as shocked as we would be, right? Of course, God then shows that Yahweh is not like those pagan gods, but and again, note that it does not prevent them from being bitten. So it's a small show of faith, but it's a show of faith. I just can't imagine, like, you get bitten and then you're there and you're looking at the serpent and then you're like, okay, and then you walk away and you get like, almost home, and then you get bitten again and you're like, well, dang. That's the things that my mind thinks about. These snakes are really putting me out, right? All right, Balak and Balaam. Yes, sir. Yes.
So we're not going to talk about how this is a foreshadowing of Jesus on the cross, and say we're dead to sin, you have faith in Jesus, you don't die. I think you mentioned it in the Testament, isn't it?
Is it? Maybe, but I'll be. It should say right next. It'll have a note right next to it in your Bible. It'll have it might have a cross reference. Does it have a New Testament cross reference? You saying that does make me think maybe there is, or is it just later in the Old Testament?
No, I think it's in the New Testament. I'll find it.
Oh, interesting. I mean, but is it so? But to answer your question, I mean, is it, yes. Well,
It's John 3:14.
Thank you.
what does it say? So will you read that?
Just as Moses lifted up the snake in the desert, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, that everyone who believes in him may have life.
So as a show of faith, I guess is what we're saying. I mean,
It's
it's a show of
a show of faith. It says you guys show
Yeah.
of faith in Jesus is
Yeah.
saving from eternal death.
I'm just trying to think if there's a closer parallel to that. So just as Moses raised up, now Jesus is seen as another Moses. I'm just trying to think if there's a closer parallel. I don't know. I'd have to look into that.
Another bit of trivia, which I'm not sure is true or not, is doctors wear the snake around a pole.
Yes,
Can't
Asclepius.
Yeah.
No, Asclepius is actually in New Testament times. That is the symbol for medicine and all of that. Yes, yes. So that comes from that. Yep. In the Book of Revelation, you also have that imagery.
Right.
Because of the fact that one of the cities, and I don't remember which one it is, one of the 7 cities, they put a lot of faith in their medicine and stuff because they're all fancy, because they have this big, university, if you will. And so, yeah. No, I did not. I did not look into that parallel. I'll look into that, and I'll see about bringing it up next week. It's just to see if there is a closer parallel, or maybe even at the end we'll look at it. All right, Numbers 22 through 24, and I'm not going to read all of this, just for the record. About Balak and Balaam. So first, I just wanted to talk about basically sorcery, divination, and prophecy, because those are all exciting. Note that sorcery in Israel is punishable by death, right? It utilized black magic, incantations, necromancy, right? And manipulation of deities, right? What is necromancy? Yeah, it's where you speak to the dead, right? And so those things are bad, right? The manipulation of gods was key, because if you do these certain things, then because the gods, again, the pagan gods, of course, are made up, by humans, and so they act like humans, and so you can trick them, you can give them their needs, and then they will do your will, right? And so that's what sorcery is all about. It's about forcing the gods to do your will, or tricking them into doing your will. And so, of course, God is not like the pagan gods, and He doesn't need anything from you, and you certainly cannot trick God into doing your will, right? Because He doesn't work that way. The pagan gods, of course, are part of the created order, and so they need things. They need food, and they need things. And people provide some of those things. Whereas Yahweh, of course, is outside of creation, and He doesn't need anything from people. Divination. Divination is about divining the will of the gods, right? And in some instances, then, that is forecasting the future. Again, we talked about the Urim and the Thummim, which are examples of divination in Israel. And again, that was not frowned upon. Divination was allowed in order to divine the will of Yahweh in some instances, right? But now look, so the difference is what? The difference is, if I'm divining the will of Yahweh, that's okay. But if I'm trying to divine the will of some other pagan god, then obviously that's a no-no, right? We can't do that. If I do anything that has to do with a pagan god, then that's bad, right? So I'm to stick with Yahweh. He's going to provide me with all of my needs. Necromancy could also be used in divination, which again is forbidden in particularly Leviticus 20:27. It says, "A man or a woman who is a medium or a necromancer shall surely be put to death. They shall be stoned with stones," as opposed to any other means of stoning someone. "Their blood shall be upon them," right? They'll be stoned with wood. No. So note that prophecy is also a type of divination where one is in direct communication with God. Here, Balaam is set up as a diviner But then he ends up having direct communication with Yahweh, right? It's kind of like when we talked about Abraham in Joshua 24, like maybe 24:7 or something. It talks about Abraham's father, and it says that Abraham's father, Terah, worshipped other gods. And so the assumption there is clearly Abraham also worshipped other gods. He's an Ammonite, right? So he, or an Amorite, whichever one. And so he would have worshipped other gods. But then God, Yahweh, suddenly speaks to him. And he's like, hey, I need you to get your stuff and move, And so he does that. And he's like, wow, one of these gods is speaking to me. And then over time, it is progressively revealed to him that Yahweh is the one true God. And so it's kind of that way with Balaam, right? And it says, just for the record, it says at 22:18, it says, Numbers 22:18, it says, but Balaam answered and said to the servants of Balak, when Balak sends his servants to get him to go and curse the Israelites, he says, though Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, I could not go beyond the command of the Lord, of Yahweh, is what the Lord there means, my God, to do less or more, right? So that seems like a good statement of, Yahweh, I respect Yahweh. And he absolutely would respect Yahweh, but he would also respect all of the other gods as well. In other words, that's his job, is to divine the will of the gods. And so he obviously is familiar with Yahweh, and notice that Yahweh allows that to work out. He allows him to, he speaks to him purposely and makes him do his will. Now, he jerks him around a lot, which is, to an ancient person, would have been hilarious. But he does allow him to, to work. He works through him. He would show respect to all the gods. So note that Balaam is sent as an expert, right? But he can't see the angel of the Lord. And again, who is the angel of the Lord? Well, it's God, right? So if we think every time God is in human form, then it's Jesus, then you could make that argument, certainly. And I will say in this passage, it jumps back and forth. Or the angel of the Lord is a divine being of some sorts who speaks with the authority of God, right? So whichever way you look at it, it speaks with the authority of God, right? Or he, however you want to look at it. So he does what he is told to do by Yahweh and only speaks blessings over the Israelites. I didn't finish my thought, sorry. So note, the donkey sees the angel of the Lord, but Balaam's this big expert in the divine realm, if you will. And so, but he can't see the angel of the Lord standing in front of him, and the donkey has to stop him from getting killed. And so again, that's the joke. And I'm not saying it's not literal or whatever, but that's the joke, is that he doesn't even know what a donkey knows, right? We could go further, but we're not going to. I'm not going to say that. So he does what he's told. He only speaks blessings over the Israelites. And so that's ultimately what ends up happening. So he goes and he says at first he's not going to go, and then he goes with the donkey and all that stuff. And basically the angel of the Lord says, look, you make sure you do exactly what I tell you to do, right? And because he seemed like he was willing, and then suddenly the angel of the Lord is going to kill him. And he's like, what am I doing? And I didn't do anything, right? Of course, he hit the donkey, so that he kind of deserved punishment for that. But so it's like, okay. And God says, hey, you make sure you do what I say. And he's like, okay, I will, right? So then he goes, and Balak comes to him 3 times, and he's like, all right, you need to curse the Israelites. And he just says blessings over them. And then Balak's like, wait a minute. I don't think you understood. You're supposed to be cursing them. And he gives more blessings. Then he comes back and he says, listen, I don't know if we're having a communication barrier or what the problem is, but you're supposed to be cursing them and you keep blessing them. And he finally says, look, I can only say what Yahweh wants me to say. And then he basically says, you're going to die. Your people are going to die. Like, this is not going to turn out good for you. And this is definitely not the way you expected. I will give you a refund on your credit card, right? So he's like, this is not what you wanted to hear, but God almost killed me while I was riding on a donkey. Note, though, that directly after the Balaam section, it is noted in Numbers 25, 1 through 3, it says, while Israel, so yeah, keep in mind the whole story is 22 through 24. So then we get to 25, which is directly after that story. And it says, while Israel lived in Shittim, the people began to whore with the daughters of Moab. Right? That's not good. These invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods, bless you, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. So Israel yoked himself to Baal of Peor, right? And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. And so Baal, again, this is just the Canaanite god Baal, right? And so note, how did they end up getting mixed up with Baal? Women, right? Men, right? You want to blame the women, but then you're like, it's the stupid men that did it. I mean, they're the dummies. They're like, they're pretty, and then they're like, wait, how did I get here in the pagan temple? Like, what happened? So then you have to follow. You go to later to Numbers 31:8, where it states, they killed the kings of Midian with the rest of their slain, Evi, Rechem, Zur, Hur, and Reba. That's not Reba McEntire. The 5 kings of Midian. And they also killed Balaam, the son of Beor, with the sword. So now we killed Balaam. Like, well, what did Balaam do? Like, he seemed like a nice enough guy, except he hit that donkey. Somebody in my Sunday school class said that they think of Shrek and they're like, they hear the voice of Eddie Murphy. Like, why did you hit me? Right? So why do we kill Balaam? Well, because Numbers 31:16 says, behold, these, on Balaam's advice, caused the people of Israel to act treacherously against the Lord in the incident of Peor. And so the plague came upon the congregation of the Lord. So even though all of that cursing stuff didn't work out, and Balaam certainly did what he was told to do in terms of blessing them, well, then he ends up basically tricking them by having the Israelite men hook up with the pagan, Canaanite women, and then that leads them astray, and they end up going and worshiping pagan gods. And then all those people end up being killed off, and so that's a major issue. Well, that is directly, it says that Balaam is the one who's responsible for that. And so then you get, even in the New Testament, you get to the book of Revelation. And so when we're talking in the 7 churches, you get where it references Balaam, those who follow Balaam, and those who follow Jezebel. Well, note that both Balaam, according to this passage, and Jezebel, according to her pretty much whole life, they tried to force the people to accommodate the pagan gods and to worship the pagan gods. And that's what the book of Revelation is saying. You can't worship the pagan gods. Don't worship the emperor, it's mainly the emperor, or the gods in the trade guilds. So don't give up your Christian values so that you can make a living, or that you don't experience discomfort from the empire because you refuse to worship the emperor. Hold out. Don't do those things. And so Balaam and Jezebel in the book of Revelation are not literal. It's saying that you're following those people who try to get you to accommodate the empire by worshiping the pagan gods and worshiping the empire. And so that references back to here, at least in terms of Balaam. So he encouraged, of course, Balaam encouraged accommodation as opposed to outright cursing them so that they would lose in battle. It's a much more subtle attack that works very well, right? Generally, we know when something's right in front of us and we're like, that thing's bad. But then when it's slow, right? I always think in terms of like addiction and stuff, right? You do something and you're like, oh, I'll be fine, whatever, name your addiction, right? You do it and you think, oh, I'll be fine. And then, you're like, I need to do that again. And then you do it again, And then eventually you're like, how did I end up like this? Whatever it may be, right? If you end up homeless or your marriage is broken or whatever it may be, it's a slow process sometimes. And you end up at, this is just, it's nothing. This will be fine. And then over time you realize, wait a minute, how did I get here? And so same thing with what happened here. It wasn't a full-on boom, you're going to lose in battle. It was a slow process of how did I end up in the pagan temple? All right. We're going to read through it. Really, it doesn't take much discussion. Joshua chosen to lead Israel. So we'll look at Numbers 27, 12 through 23. It says, the Lord said to Moses, go up into this mountain of Abiram and see the land that I have given to the people of Israel. So notice he sends Moses out to look at the land. He's like, hey, look at the land. This is the land you're not going to get to go into. Sad days. When you have seen it, you also shall be gathered to your people as your brother Aaron was. Because you rebelled against my word in the wilderness of Zin when the congregation quarreled, failing to uphold me as holy at the waters before their eyes. These are the waters of Meribah of Kadesh in the wilderness of Zin. Moses spoke to the Lord, saying, let the Lord, the God of the spirits of all flesh, appoint a man over the congregation, who shall go out before them and come in before them, who shall lead them out and bring them in, that the congregation of the Lord may not be as sheep that have no shepherd. So the Lord said to Moses, take Joshua the son of Nun, a man in whom is the Spirit, and lay your hand on him. Remember, it was Caleb and Joshua who before had faith when they went out and spied out the land of Canaan, and they were like, hey, we can beat these people. And everybody else was like, no, right? Make him stand before Eleazar the priest and all the congregation, and you shall commission him in their sight. You shall invest him with some of your authority, that all the congregation of the people of Israel may obey. And he shall stand before Eleazar the priest, who shall inquire for him by the judgment of the Urim. But interestingly, it doesn't mention the Thummim. And so if what we said before, if the Urim was a dark stone and the Thummim was a light stone, because again, we don't really know what those are, but if that's one of the theories, then at this point we only have one stone, right? So how would that work then? So I don't know. Is it assumed that if you have the Urim, you have the Thummim? Note they're in the breastplate of the priest, right? And so does he just take out one and use it? Who knows? At his word they shall go out, and at his word they shall come in, both he and all the people of Israel with him, the whole congregation. And Moses did as the Lord commanded him. He took Joshua and made him stand before Eleazar the priest and the whole congregation. And he laid his hands on him and commissioned him as the Lord directed through Moses, right? And so again, you have Joshua commissioned to be the next leader. And note that again, you have the old guard who was in the wilderness wanderings, the ones that, didn't have faith. And even though obviously Moses had faith, but you get to that point where he doesn't, right? And so it's kind of like, all right, let's, they've gotten us where we need to be. They got us out of Egypt and all of that. But now it's going to take a new generation to go into the land of Canaan and actually fight and do all of that. And so that's kind of what we're doing, is we're moving over to the new generation. All right, and I think it's the last thing, yeah. The last thing that we're going to look at is, and we're not going to read it or anything, we're just going to talk kind of about the conquest of Midian. And we'll talk more when we get to the actual conquest. We'll talk a little bit about that's in Numbers 31, 9 through 24. We'll talk a little more about the ethical, stuff when it talks about the conquest and killing everybody and all that stuff. But note that Phinehas, the priest, he goes with them and carries the vessels of the sanctuary and the trumpets for the alarm, right? So this symbolizes, again, Yahweh's presence in battle, right? And if you'll remember, we talked in the past, let's say that we're here in Morris, Alabama, right? And we're going to go to battle against Gardendale, right? Well, we worship the God of Morris, and they worship the God of Gardendale, and so we're going to go into battle, right? Well, we're not really the ones fighting. Okay, now it seems like it when you're out there, right? You're like, I don't know, I feel like I'm fighting, right? These people are coming at me with scary weapons. But it's really the gods who are doing battle, right? And so, again, that's why we can have the contest of champions, where we have two people go out. That's why we can have a David and a Goliath go out and fight each other, and that's going to determine the whole battle, right? Because that seems kind of foolish. It's like, I don't know, I don't think I want to gamble with this, right? Especially if I have more people. I'm thinking, I don't know if I want to gamble. Well, if your mindset is, regardless of who does the fighting, the gods are the ones actually doing it, right? And so whether these two people do it or whether 500 people on either side or 500,000 people on either side end up having to die, either way, the gods are going to determine who wins. And so we can say, let's just let these two people fight. The gods are going to figure it out either way, right? So that's kind of the deal. So when we go out, that's why we take, these implements, that represent God. And just for the record, it says, clearly that God fights with them at some time. But they're taking that out there, and that symbolizes God being with his people fighting. So they win the battle, but then Moses is unhappy. Why is Moses unhappy? Because we kept the women alive, right? You say, wait, what? He was angry for that? Notice that they were snares used by Balaam in order to turn the hearts of the people, women in general, Canaanite women in general. And that's the deal. That's the thing, is it's like, look, God knows what's going to happen. And listen, if you don't look at that and think, man, that seems kind of, that's cold-blooded. All the, every man, woman, and child, right? I mean, that's pretty cold-blooded, right? It would be hard for us to go in and do something like that. But if God knows all and he can see and, what's going to happen in the future, then he knows how this is going to turn out. And interestingly enough, we also know how this is going to turn out because we live 3,220 years after this, right? And so we know how it's going to turn out as well. And we know that they're going to end up exiled for not getting rid of all these people that they were supposed to get rid of, right? Notice that the virgins who are left alive are young enough to be assimilated into Israelite culture. That's the reason that they're left. So when you think about this, I always, and it's a horrible analogy, but it's a good analogy, right? Let's think about Hitler. Okay, obviously, I think if you don't agree Hitler is bad, then you probably need to see somebody or something. So Hitler, we can all say is bad, right? We can say in general, in our limited, understanding, we could say if Hitler had not been around, we would have been a lot better off, right? And certainly 6 million Jews and others, gypsies and, people of color and different things, they would have all been better off. So let's say that you could go back to 1900, which is about when he would have been born, and little baby Hitler is there in the crib, right? And there's a pillow sitting right there, and you could just take that pillow and just snuff out little baby Hitler's life and save 6 million Jews and all those other people that died, right? Now, obviously, that would be a horrifying thing to do. But if you sat down and thought about it and you thought, okay, well, this will save millions of people in the future, like that's your ethical dilemma, right? Is what do you do? If you knew for a fact and you're not going to go to jail and you're not going to be whatever, or listen, let me just say, even if you were, if you somehow could know 1,000% that this guy's going to kill, millions of people later on, and if you were to kill him, even if you ended up going to jail, I mean, that even adds to the deal. What decision do you make, right? I mean, that would be a hard decision. Well, God, in his infinite wisdom, he knows all of those things, and he can work those things out. For us, what if, yes, you could snuff out Hitler, but what if for some reason something happened in Hitler's life that needed to happen in order for this, that? I'm not saying that he needed to kill 6 million Jews to, teach a lesson. Oftentimes people will say stuff like that, and that is a wrong-headed thing to say. All right, you got to be careful saying stuff like that. Not good. But we don't get to make those decisions. Obviously, one small part of that is that we can't go back in time, right? But we also don't have that knowledge to make those decisions. And so God does. And so that's the types of decisions God can make because he knows all. And he knows how each thing is going to affect another thing and how it's going to go on down the line. He knows all of those things, right? So he can say, kill every man, woman, and child here, because one, they'll become a snare later on down the road, but also note that God can judge people based on actions that may not have happened yet, right? And so if we know that all these people are going to just be evil later on down the road, then God has the ability to judge those people right now, right? And so he gets to make those decisions. We don't get to make those decisions. God can make those decisions.
You gotta look at God's.
Thanks for watching, and please feel free to leave a comment or question. And if you found this video helpful, hit like. And if you would like to be notified when new videos are released, hit subscribe and join us next time as we study the Bible in context.